Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot Podcast. I am thrilled to be joined by Gardner Barrier. He runs Gardner Barrier Consulting, also former head of school at Forsyth Country Day in North Carolina. And I'm really excited for him to be on the pod today because one of the things that I've had talked about it a lot on this pod. I mean, certainly this is a big part of what we do at Moonshot OS is that I've had so many conversations with heads of school who have gotten amazing training, like, just the pipeline to support them is incredible. But there's a gap, and what they discover often is that when they land in the role, just how much of the job is tied to business realities of school, and that it is truly a CEO function, and I've said this lots of times, but, like, I would argue being a head of school is more complex than running many, many for-profit companies just because of the different constituent groups, the different levers, like, there's just a lot going on. And so when Gardner and I were talking and he had mentioned that he got his MBA and used that, leaned on that extensively in terms of when he was running Forsyth Country Day, I was like, "Oh, there's a story here. Like, let's have a conversation about how that pathway supported him as being a head of school for many, many years." So with that, Gardner, welcome, to the podcast.
Well, thank you, sir. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm really thrilled that you're here too, and we're gonna dig into all of this in just a second, but before we do, can you introduce yourself and your coaching business?
Sure. So Gardner Barrier, I'm a very creative person, so I landed on a really unusual, complicated naming convention, Gardner Barrier Consulting. And yeah, what I'm doing is all about purpose. Helping people understand what brings them joy, what brings them internal meaning, and then how to get that translating to feeling fulfilled and successful externally. So a lot of purpose work, and that shows up in coaching and encouraging and come alongside people, and then as organizations in the as Peter and I previously talked about in the kind of arc of kind of the strategic work, um, where are you going in terms of the visioning, and then how you work a plan, and then or how you develop a plan, and then how you work a plan. So I'm kind of that early stage of that, of just helping individuals and organizations have clarity around what makes them distinctive, who they're trying to be, things of that nature, and really
Yeah. And talk a little bit about your journey to becoming a head of school.
Whew, sure. So I was a teacher and coach for several years and had the opportunity to go to evening MBA school at Wake Forest in Winston-Salem, where I'm recording this from. And I started that MBA, in my mid-20s, just kind of thinking it'd give me a credential that would potentially let me pivot out of education and in terms of starting a family, and just kind of this practical kind of things. And right as I was finishing MBA school, two things happened. I got an opportunity to become a middle school director, which was awesome. And I became an adjunct. What I was doing while I was at Wake, given my education background, was I was kind of doing review sessions for classmates in more of the quantitative heavy things because of my math background. So I ended up kind of staying on as this kind of program assistant adjunct with Wake for 6 years, helping with finance, accounting, quantitative methods. And it was really great. Peter, to your point of balance, which I think is going to be a theme of this conversation in terms of a school and that's a business.
Yeah.
The dean of the business school at Wake Forest, as I was an adjunct there, Dean Reineman, he had been the CEO of Pepsi. And so he didn't have an academic background. But he knew a thing or two about business, and he had this really great way of looking at balance with the faculty, where he had kind of the traditional, PhD in finance academician that came up through that route, and then he had professors of practice that, like him, had run BB&T Bank and John Allison's case, and his case Pepsi. These people that had been in the field, and so it was very much a theory and practice,
Yeah.
and so that inspired me as an educator. Again, in my balance roles ahead, to think of that as well. So, got those opportunities. Was at a lovely school in Westchester. Got to be a division director for I guess 6 years within roles there. Moved to a school, really neat progressive school, pre-K through ninth grade school, Summit, where I was the assistant head and ran their upper school, which is sixth through ninth. We looked at a through 12th model. And then I went to school at Forsyth Country Days. So it was a real honor when I got to put my name in the hat and talk to them. And a lot of what Forsyth was looking for, I was the right guy at the right time, and that I went to school there knew the market, knew the culture, but also really they needed to do good culture work. And that Peter Drucker quote of, culture eats strategy for breakfast is a really important one. And they also really needed to be balanced with, that, again, that balance of running a great school, meaning being pedagogically distinctive and all of those things, while also having some business savvy to really, run a good business. So I was fortunate to get to do that for a number of years, and shout out to the Furies. It's remarkable staff. And by the way, the to all with all due respect to any CFO listening to this, Andrea Matney at Forsyth Country Day is the best. It was amazing getting to work with her. So, hey, Andrea, if you happen to be listening to this.
That's great. I really appreciate that journey, and I agree. I think this conversation is going to really kind of lean into that theme of balance for sure. Um, I do have a question. Like, what inspired you to get? I mean, clearly you were in the independent school world, right? You were working at multiple schools, different roles, did different leadership roles. What inspired you to get an MBA?
Yeah, great question. I was gonna go get a PhD in economics right out of undergrad, and ended up going to talk to a professor in the ed school
Mm.
about my research to do about rationality of children was kind of what I did. So I went into schools and was asking questions about how they made economic decisions. My undergraduate years, I helped run the economics lab, and again, it was kind of applied psych. It was how you make decisions and kind of just studying the psychology that related to money.
Yeah.
So long story short, I ended up pivoting out of econ, which is my undergraduate discipline, and I was on my way to a PhD. And after talking to the guy in the ed school a few times, I ended up in the MEd for middle grades education. And context here is my older brother, Tim Barrier. Hey, Tim, is 13 years older and longtime independent school person. And I kind of look at his life. He's an amazing human being, and he was a middle school director as I was starting to teach, and then he became a head. And part of our conversations was how much of the job we come from a very mathematical family,
Mm.
um, and how much of the job of head of school really is feeling competent in the finance committee and really feeling like you understand how you're keeping up with that conversation and providing value to just kind of the overall positioning of the school. So you can amplify the mission through having a good business.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the finance committee. Like, what surprised you when when you first started to sit in on that meeting?
Well, first of all, back to Andrea, she was always so prepared, and I don't know being a head of school without having her as my CFO. Um, I, I wrote something. I think it ended up in NAIS or got quoted. I didn't write it. Few years back, just talking about this head of school and CFO relationship, and she was just so great. So in terms of preparing for the meeting, she knew the cadence. She was very helpful. I'd say in terms of Andrea and I working together of helping the board, especially as people were newer to the conversation, newer on the committee, of where to enter the conversation and really helping them at the right altitude of where do we really need help.
Yeah.
We're not asking them to be in the business office. Andrea and her team were amazing. We had all the day to day. So it's really more of, if we make this kind of decision related to tuition increase, what does that do? Or one we really talked a lot about was kind of peak to trough. What's the price of 12th grade versus preschool, and
Mhm.
how to be mindful of just the overall shape of our tuition levels and what we think we're communicating versus what we're really communicating to our families, and really looking at that seriously. So just understanding for really competent, financially minded people to understand how to enter this business model and kind of understand the right question or questions. And over the first few years I was there, and we got more sophisticated throughout the years, how to have the right dashboard in front of them. So they're
Yeah.
looking at metrics that matter and not just kind of like, hey, how many third graders are there? Well, does that matter for this conversation?
Yeah.
Because indirectly it does, but it's not really that question. Yeah.
How did you evolve, from a dashboarding point of view? Like, how did your thinking as a leader, as a part of as part of the finance committee, like, where did that take you over time?
Great question. I think we increasingly as a board, and I was honored to work with, some wonderful people over a lot of years. We kind of built our own dashboard. MBOA had some good things that we modeled. We used several tools from several places and kind of kind of do it yourself, a little DIY there, but or DYI. Um, but over time, we got more refined, and as we got into the second strategic plan for me being there, I knew Jason Kern pretty well, and he's with Mission of Data, and just knew that we had done a lot of work on culture and visioning, and that was really time for the accountability of the data. So they were really helpful in building some dashboards with us to really help us be more disciplined around all right the way we built them into the just the portal that the board had and so forth. That we really did study those between meetings and really used them at every meeting. It wasn't um, kind of like a lot of strategic plans end up being. It wasn't like good work that's on that got shelved. It was work that we really did get in the cadence of. Let's look at this. And one of the things, I don't know if this was Jason or I don't know where I picked this up, but just a really good dashboard drives really good questions. Really good questions drive really good culture. I don't know who said that, but at some point somebody said that. I was like, that's
Yeah.
good. And I think that's the biggest thing I observed over time is we just dialed in better questions. And that was really to me kind of the scorecard of a good dashboard was okay, good numbers are there as evidenced by we're actually engaging with them and actually asking questions that are, on target strategic questions, not kind of like left field questions.
And I imagine that scorecard, I mean, or that dashboard didn't just, sit at the board level, but I imagine it drove lots of conversation at the leadership team level too.
It did. We were getting, I think, better and better in terms of how to have a dare I use the phrase operating system for
No, please.
executing on our yeah, I mean, the exact kind of work you're so helpful with of, all right, that's great that you have a plan. How do you dust it off and really have good implementation?
Yeah.
I think we were really making our stride there such that, not perfectly, if I or my sense of it, but a pretty good job where the board and the leadership team and the faculty, we're all coming out of the same plan with at least similar, if not the same, understandings of things. And yeah, that was important to have. I would say more sophisticated dashboard, better questions, and also the transparency that allowed for. Again, with our parents, with our staff, of here's the metric, here's why it's the metric.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that was disarming in terms of, here's our goals, here's why they're the goals, here's what it lets us do. Um, Different talking points with constituencies, but a lot of overlap.
Did you, I mean, what you're talking about is a really important part of any organization, whether you're a school or a for-profit business, is like you need to understand your data, you need to understand it well. Were there other kind of business frameworks, concepts, were there other things that you introduced while you were ahead, or was that like the primary driver? Like we've got to get really good with our data.
I would say data and just in general, I knew that I'm kind of big picture, big vision kind of person and really wanted, in terms of leadership team, people around me that could help land the planes and really, you know, see the action part of the plan live well. So some things we looked at was we didn't adopt, holistically EOS, but we had, we'd read Traction and talked about some of that. We had looked at Agile and what does Scrum provide, and tried to just get sharper and better with just how we use time, how we came to decisions. Yeah, leave a meeting with more clarity, not less. So Lencioni's some of his work, um, even there's a book I don't recall the author. See you at the next meeting, I believe is the name of it, and just getting really clear about what kind of conversation you're in. So I wouldn't say we adopted an operating system, but I would say that Agile Scrum, Mike and Jason at All Saints, we're colleagues, our colleagues, good friends. Some of what they were doing with Scrum and taking our team to go watch them do that was inspiring to see how you can have a lot of jobs, a lot of tasks, a lot of sprints. There you go. That's the right vocabulary. Going at once without being overwhelming. And yeah, so I'd say we were trying to kind of cherry pick the, the versions of EOS and so forth that felt helpful in terms of just having some frameworks in our head to give us more clarity.
What it sounds to me is like you built an operating system that worked well for Forsyth. Like, because every organization has an operating system. It's just whether it's intentional or unintentional.
Well, and in terms of business frameworks and so forth, big believer, Jim Collins, and the phrase of "get the right people on the bus."
100%.
Peter, it's just a fact. I had and Forsyth continues to have a very high capacity team. So I think that was key. Good systems really matter. Good people working with good systems. And I was very fortunate to have a very, I mean, truly, Forsyth has a tremendous staff.
That is for a leader, that is one of the hardest things that you can possibly that's in front of you is building that high capacity, high trust team. And that is just it's not like a switch you can flip, right? That there's so many components that go into it. Like, what were some of the things that you were thinking about as you were kind of building that team?
Well, I think being able to engage with complexity, right? Like what we were trying to do is nuanced and in terms of philosophically, like what kind of school we're trying to be, but also how the parts thread together in terms of the business piece. This is something I picked up the last head of school I worked for, Michael Ebling at Summit, talked a lot about managing to each other's leadership.
Mm,
So being able to also understand that, like within my role as head of school, if we were talking about, I've already mentioned her a couple of times, but financial matters. All right, Andrea, tell us what we need to know, and how to defer to each other and have that kind of fluidity of kind of who's got the floor, who's the expert on this topic. That was really important. I'll give you another example. It was really cool how we had kind of a strategic campus master plan group. And the person that chaired that was our architect in residence. So we hired an architect instead of doing the national firm thing. She was a local architect. She's brilliant, brilliant, and the natural teacher. So she was our architect, and then she taught a couple introduction to architecture classes. But point being, really wanted her to chair that work because she'd bring design thinking to it. So it was just really good process stuff. And that requires something I talk about and write about a lot, humility to go, okay, I am, her name's Lauren. Hey, Lauren, I am Lauren's boss, but goodness gracious, if we're talking about, intentionality around, the design build, or the third teacher, if you will, really listen to her. By the way, Lauren and the assistant head of school, Michelle and Yolanda teaching and learning, they just got a national award for working with Smith Systems on third teacher and campus design. So, hiring and having and believing in high capacity people and then let them lead the areas they're expert. So to me, that was key that, it can't be territorial. It can't be possessive. It's got to be a very, team. I said this, it's kind of cliche, but I said it a lot that as part of our culture, we have to have a name on the front of the jersey culture. And if you have a name on the back kind of mindset, it's just not going to work with what we were doing because it was very much a how can I pitch in? Okay, you're running point here. How can I be on your team for this? So I'd say that was key.
You know, you've got such an interesting background, Gardner. I mean, obviously deep experience in independent schools, a variety of roles, all the way to leading a school for a long time. But then, if you think about this MBA program you did and then being an adjunct professor, when you stepped into the head's role, and clearly, like, I'm sure part of what appealed to them was this kind of different kind of leadership path that you took. Did you find that people like, as you started to lead the school and maybe you were leaning into some of the things that you learned during your MBA as an adjunct professor, like, did that cause discomfort for folks? Like, was there a period of like, "Okay, I've gotta get people up to speed," and I'm just super curious about that.
Yeah, I'd say one area where I'm unusual probably as an educator, and perhaps this is kind of that business training, perhaps it's just my like hardwiring. I'm not risk averse. And in
Mm.
full stop, that probably makes me a little different than a lot of educators. And I'm probably less risk averse than a lot of the people that were even on our board. So it was interesting in terms of comfort with challenging things, changing things, and just not feeling like the call for our mission is to kind of preserve what's been. It's let's ask the honest questions, upset the apple cart. I remember I used a term in an early board meeting, And it was really thoughtful feedback in terms of just, language matters. I was
Oh,
talking
yeah.
about disrupting, and a board member pulled me aside and says, "I understand why you're saying that and how you're saying that. And please appreciate you're talking about our children." And I said, "That is such good feedback," and that right there is the tension of change in schools, because it's, let's change things, let's disrupt things, you know, let's try some things, but don't experiment with my kid. So there's that natural tension to that. And that was important. And one of my reflections, Peter, for the MBA was, you know, going into it, such a big deal is made out of the hard classes tend to be the quantitative ones. Finance is tough and quantitative methods is tough. The most enduring courses from my MBA experience from the curriculum were leading change, negotiations, these supposed soft skill classes that were perhaps not as hard to quantitatively arrive at a satisfactory grade,
Yeah.
but man, that's the stuff that used all the time. And I felt fortunate in that way, and that a lot of people have a learning curve entering the heads roll on the quantitative side of things, of catching up to what is the investment committee talking about, what's an index fund or whatever. That wasn't me. And I was really getting to focus on and practice, because I was comfortable and confident in those areas. The nuance of, how do you lead change, um, and how you're really mindful of language, and again, how you're self-aware to know that, look, I'm comfortable making 16 changes tomorrow. That doesn't matter. Where's the community?
Right, right, right. So I got a couple questions to follow up on that. The first one is, okay, you got the feedback. Don't, avoid using the word disruption. So how did you change your language?
Good question. I was just more intentional in terms of vocabulary that kind of dulls the edge on words like disrupt, that can feel revolution, and I was more mindful of evolution and intentional change, incremental change, just vocabulary that still gets you there. And ultimately, in my opinion, big changes have to be a lot of small changes, right? It's this accumulation of intentional small acts that get you there. It's not a pull off the band-aid and
Right.
there you go.
Let's break stuff
So
kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so I think that was helpful in terms of, there were some things I had real clarity about where we wanted to go, um, and telling people that wouldn't be helpful to them. I'll give you an example, and I'm not proposing this for Forsyth or other schools that have these programs, but my conjecture would be, in 10 years, less schools will have AP than have them.
Mm.
So, okay, if that's true in 10 years, what does change management look like? And I'm not saying anything too novel there. That's obviously already started with a lot of schools and a
Sure.
lot of markets. But again, that would be my opinion, that, if we wake up in, 2036 and Forsyth still has APs, I will be surprised. Um, and I'll be surprised generally if schools are still holding on to that. Now, I've been wrong about a lot of things, but you go out 10 years. But again, if I said to the, third grade parents at Forsyth, by the time your kid's a senior, we're not gonna have APs, I'd be dealing with anxious third grade parents of, what are you gonna do? So wasn't helpful to give voice to that kind of example.
Right. Gardner, when you're obviously you bring all these analytical skills to the table, pretty deep understanding the financial side of the house. How did you like maintain or how did you reconcile a stronger financial discipline with protecting, mission and community? I mean, is there a natural conflict there, or was that a fairly easy thing for you to navigate?
To me, I love this question. I think there's this a thing I talk a lot about, Peter, is there's just a lot of false choices in education. Like, we're going to be this like warm community, or we're going to be this rigorous academic community, and that was the name of our last strategic plan, was both and. We're going
Mm,
to be both. We're going to be warm and kind, good humans that develop analytical skills. I'd say similar things here. That to me, it takes real discipline, back to culture, on what are the inputs and what are the outputs.
yeah.
And if you really focus on running a great school where, kids feel, treasured, they're cared for, they know their relationships are strong, they know they've got a lot of advocates, they know they've got a lot of opportunities across the curriculum, academically, but artistically, athletically, student life, you name it, just a lot of opportunities. And thus they have happy parents. if you do that right, and then you're mindful around, what makes a great learning community in terms of just diverse perspectives, diversity of thought, which is going to probably correlate somewhat with socioeconomic diversity. And then, as a board, we're looking at it going, we know our overall discount rate needs to be about X. We want to watch net tuition revenue go up. So if we can see those trends, um, again, back to the word balance, it's just this constant
Yeah.
calibration of um, understanding decisions we're making that are financially sustainable, and things like having kind of a discount rate in mind, that was pretty constant for us the last 3 or 4 years I was there. Um, that's really important, and really allows for a great culture. And if you get culture right, in my opinion, enrollment becomes, you're not chasing second graders. You have a great school where there's a wait list, and we saw
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. How long and was that a process for you?
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, tuition enrollment grew by 50% in the time I was in my 9 years.
What were some of the things that you did that you felt like you and that the team did, that the community did that contributed to that?
I think this will take me a second to explain, but I think every school has to just kind of be market aware, and that's part of your reality of strategy. And the way I expressed it was the pendulum tends to swing, and I feel like Forsyth had been kind of this place that was kind of welcoming all, and then it kind of swung the other way. And
Yeah.
so we were kind of finding middle of the way I said it was we were a lot of things to a lot of people, and the hardest conversations that we grappled with was what aren't we? And I feel like answering that question is really important for schools. As a school aspiring to serve 900-ish students in our market, um, they're all not going to have profiles that suggest they're going to an Ivy League school, and that's not the point. So it's really getting clear on what kind of human beings are we encouraging, what kind of academic standards do we want to maintain, with an understanding that there's a range of students we want to serve, and we want to. Another phrase we used a lot was like, what is responsibility as a core value? What does that inform on the admission front? We want to accept a student with the full expectation that they will be successful here. Their parents are bought into our mission. Their learning profile suggests that they're a hard worker, and they will be well served with the supports we can put in place. So I think that was a lot of our strategy, was acknowledging that in this market, there are just tremendous kids that can be that B kid, that can be kind of that invisible kid in a bigger system, and the attention, intention, and attention at a school like Forsyth. I think that was where we really had kind of our sweet spot. These really earnest kids that were hardworking and great, and because they got the attention and the feedback on the writing and so forth, they really, their growth was tremendous. And to me, that was important to strategy. I understand that, some schools are in markets where they want to be, super selective, or be kind of more narrow in who they serve. It's great. Just be clear about that if that's the model you're building. In our case, it was a wider group of children that we wanted to serve, but understanding the limit points of that. So I'd say that's really kind of how we shaped that.
Yeah, that's really I mean, that's fascinating strategy. I did a podcast episode, maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, with Rob Phillips from Seattle Academy, and he expressed a very similar point of view, is that, if they can work with a wider spectrum of kids, then, they're living their mission, right? They're that's what they're here to do, and I think that's an interesting strategy, not for every school, but certainly
Not for every
for
school.
a school like Forsyth, it sounds like it was the right fit.
Well, and we talked a lot about the jobs to be done, and I remember I took a group to Strategy Lab in DC with
Yeah.
at the time Tim Fish's team, and we looked at the jobs, and it's like, we're not a school that's trying to just do one job. We were kind of primarily job 2, 3,
Yeah,
with
yeah,
1, 4,
yeah,
but we're clear on how we were job 1 and how we were job 4, but primarily 2 and 3. And our vision statement spoke to it. Know yourself, connect with others, build community. And that speaks to, we're really trying to raise decent human beings that are kind and going to be good citizens, which Okay, that also means they have competencies that allow them to positively contribute to the community, including things like kindness, but also what are their, analytical skill sets where they can really be a good team member.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned jobs to be done because Tim Fish was on the pod, I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe 6 months ago or so. I feel like I'm name dropping you. That's not that's not what I like to do. But Tim's a good friend, and, one of the things that we talked about was, you don't have one job per school, right? Like, you're gonna have multiple jobs. You may lean heavier towards one in particular, but realistically, like, it's gonna be a combination of things.
That was us, and almost spatially, it was kinda like 2 and 3. It's almost like a bell curve of 2 and 3 were in the middle, and
Yeah,
1 and 4 were lesser so.
yeah,
Um, I've never said it that way, but I like that. But yeah, I think just awareness of that model and then awareness of where you're mapped to that model and that your for instance, your talking points and your strategy
yeah,
lines up with who that awareness of who you're serving and why they came to you. Yeah.
yeah.
And COVID not relates with that too, right? It's just a lot of people were looking for particular things with what other places weren't able to deliver on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And as we begin to wrap up, I guess I have one last question for you.
Sure.
If a head of school called you today and said, "You know what? Like, I just I need to build that business acumen. I've got to kind of build out my business skills." And maybe they don't have time for an MBA. I guess the question is, where would you advise them to start?
In terms of uh, there's a lot of places. I mean, there's great resources with various people putting together ways to support heads. There's more certificate programs at the higher ed level.
Yeah.
Weekend workshops and various things. Get some baseline in accounting. I remember this goes back a long time. I was in the math classroom, probably close to 20 years. Just starting to tell seventh graders about Saul Kahn and Khan Academy. Peter, Saul's background is finance. I mean, you can if you really
Okay.
don't know much with econ or finance or whatever else, like to the degree that especially if you feel like you're like, I don't know, a classics major, really, really knowledgeable, English background or something, and you just don't want to be in a group setting and ask the embarrassing question. Goodness gracious, Khan Academy is such an
Amazing,
resource.
right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
an amazing resource. So I do think there's a lot of ways to kind of privately take the 101 kind of steps to become a little bit conversant with vocabulary. And then, yeah, there's a lot of organizations, a lot of higher ed programs. For instance, Wake Forest, I just talked to the guy that runs Charles, runs the professional studies at Wake Forest. Again, he was my boss he was the dean of the business school after Dean Reineman. Their professional studies program, it's based in Charlotte. They got a lot of online programs. Really good things for people that are um, with so many people in education and beyond it that in the in mid career or wherever they have
Yeah.
to skill up. They just have to pivot. They have to get different skills. So that the path I took, that division director that's now getting their first chance to be ahead, there's a lot of great certificates to go take a look at. But I would start on Khan Academy. It's the price is effective too.
Yeah, the price is affected. I have this graphic. It's like the business competencies for independent school leaders. And if you go on my site, you'll find it pretty easily. But I always tell people self-assess, like how are you across these different competencies and use that as a way to direct your learning. Whether you do it with me, whether you do it with Con, wherever you do it, but kind of understand like where are there opportunities for you to grow. And it's a helpful tool in that way.
Yeah, and my biggest advice to new heads or aspiring heads or people that are in a headship and feel
Yeah.
um, a little intimidated by the conversation with the finance committee is ask the questions. The worst thing you can do is sit there like if you don't.
100%.
Be curious. And what I've found is when people are willing to ask the question, they're not the only one. You know?
Without question, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. This is
Yeah.
great advice. Gardner Barrier Consulting, thank you so much. If somebody wants to, reach out and connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So my website's my name, gardnerbarrier.com. Just hop on there. They can find my cell number there, my email.
And I'll link to it in the
WhatsApp.
show notes for sure.
What's that?
And I'll link to your website in the show notes for
Perfect.
sure.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. This is fantastic. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Gardner.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me here.
Yeah. And for those of you who are part of Moonshot Lab, hang tight. We're going to jump into the next part of the podcast for you. For those of you who just had a chance to listen to it, thank you for listening. I really do appreciate it.